Let's have a quick look at the early embryonic development. So the embryo develops from basically a single-celled organism. It's the zygote. The zygote is what the single cell is called after the fertilization of the sperm and the egg. Here you've got the zygote. Okay, so the zygote then further divides. So the zygote is trying to really increase its surface area as quickly as possible to be able to absorb nutrients that it so essentially needs. So it doesn't even have time to grow. So here it will just start dividing. When the zygote divides without occupying more space, this is called cleavage. So here it divides in half, then it divides into 4, then it divides into 8, then so on and so on. When the zygote divides enough, sufficiently, it's now called a morula. Okay, this is just when there's 32 cells or there's a lot of cells. Here you'll notice that there's a layer covering the zygote or then the morula, and this layer is called the Zona Pellucida, which we've come across before. Here is the morula. Here is the morula. Then you've got the morula divides into two layers of cells. There's an outer layer of cells and an inner layer of cells. The outer layer of cells is known as what we like to call trophoblast. But the inner layer of cell is what forms the embryo eventually, so it's called embryoblast. Blast means to form. Trophoblast is what forms all of the outside stuff. Then here we've got here we've got the trophoblast, here we've got the embryoblast. Now basically there's an inner cell mass and an outer cell mass. Here you've got the inner cell mass. Basically when the embryoblast goes to a little corner, goes to a little section of it, it basically just forms a different cavity here. There's a cavity here, and then this is formed. This is kind of called the outer cell mass. And then when the cells, the embryoblast is just off to one side. Here's the embryoblast. Now the embryoblast basically now it needs even more nutrients, and it doesn't have enough space. So what's it gonna do? Here, by the way, this is no longer called a morula. When you've got an embryoblast and trophoblast, and it's kind of like this forms a space as well, it's called a blastocyst. Now there's also like different stages. You had the stages of basically there's different stages. So you have the stage of basically you have the morula, then you've got the blastocyst, then you've got the stage of gastrulation, which we'll come to next. So here, then basically when it needs more nutrients, it basically leaves a space for stuff to come in and stuff to go out. It's like a passageway, and this passageway is known as the amniotic cavity. Okay, this is the amniotic cavity. And then the trophoblast, basically, the trophoblast is the outside. By the way, you also lose the zona pellucida. When you lose the zona pellucida, it forms, basically, leaves this stuff here. Then underneath the embryoblast, you've got something called the hypoblast. There's two stages. Here, when there's two different things, you form something called a bilaminar, which means 2 layers embryo. Bilaminar embryo or bilaminar disc here. So why? Because you had the hypoblast and you had the embryoblast. The top layer is called epiblast, the bottom layer is called hypoblast. Here. Then you've got something called a primitive streak. This primitive streak is really important because this is where everything's going to start to develop from. Okay, this primitive streak is the focal point. It's like the singularity which caused the Big Bang. Anyway, basically, this primitive streak then goes on to further development. And then you form a trilaminar, which includes an epiblast, a hypoblast, and a mesoblast, which gives all of the 3 different germ layers. You know, the epiblast, the mesoblast, and the whatever else I'm saying. Yeah.